In country music, toughness isn't about swagger on stage. It's about surviving the kind of real-life battles most people never come back from. These 10 legends didn't just sing about pain, grit, and redemption. They lived it. From brutal childhoods and prison sentences to addiction, near-fatal accidents, and careers pushed to the edge, these stars proved they were forged in fire long before fame ever found them. More. Johnny Cash, the man who refused to break. Johnny Cash's legend wasn't built on the outlaw image alone. It was carved out of a life filled with hardship, violence, guilt, and battles that nearly destroyed him long before his career ever took shape. Born into poverty in the Arkansas cotton fields, Cash grew up under a punishing sun, picking crops beside exhausted adults, while listening to the sound of freight trains echoing across the Delta. That landscape shaped him. It made him tougher, sharper, and older than his years. But it also exposed him to the kind of grief that would mark him for life, especially the tragic death of his older brother Jack, an event Cash carried like a shadow he could never outrun. As he rose through the ranks of country music in the 1950s, Cash was no polished Nashville star. He fought through stage fright, financial struggles, and a broken sense of self that would later drive him toward pills, alcohol, and erratic behavior. Fame didn't fix anything. It only magnified the storms inside him. The outlaw label came not from marketing, but from a real descent into addiction so severe that friends doubted he would survive it. At his worst, Cash was destroying hotel rooms, disappearing for days, crashing cars, and swallowing handfuls of amphetamines before walking on stage. And yet, through all of it, he never stopped performing with a voice that carried pain like a warning bell. Cash's toughness wasn't just about chaos, it was about the fight to come back from it. His near-fatal period in the 1960s ended when June Carter pulled him from the edge, forcing him to confront the addictions tearing him apart. Unlike many artists of that era, Cash didn't hide his struggles. He wrote about them, sang them, and brought them to places other artists wouldn't dare go, especially America's prisons. His performances at Folsom and San Quentin weren't stunts. They were acts of solidarity with men he believed society had thrown away. Cash understood those inmates because he saw pieces of himself in them: anger, regret, and the search for redemption. In the end, Cash's toughness came not from surviving one big catastrophe, but from surviving all of them. Childhood trauma, addiction, arrests, a failing marriage, catastrophic health issues, and the ruthless pressure of the music industry. What made him legendary wasn't invincibility. It was endurance. He broke, rebuilt, broke again, and still kept moving. That is what makes Johnny Cash one of the toughest figures in country music history. Waylon Jennings, the outlaw who was never supposed to survive. Waylon Jennings did not become an outlaw because Nashville needed a rebel. He became an outlaw because life pushed him into corners most people never escape. Born in the dust of West Texas during some of the hardest economic years in American history, Jennings learned early that survival depended on grit, instinct, and the ability to stand your ground. By the time he was a teenager, he was already working adult jobs, playing late-night barrooms, and navigating towns where a fight could break out faster than a song could start. But the defining moment of his toughness came in 1959, the night Buddy Holly's plane crashed. Jennings had given up his seat to J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, a decision that saved his life while killing close friends. The survivor's guilt haunted him for decades. The final words he said to Holly, joking that he hoped the plane would freeze up, became a torment he carried privately. That weight hardened him. It pushed him into a life of restless rebellion that shaped his sound, his image, and his approach to country music. As he entered the Nashville industry in the 1960s, Jennings quickly realized he didn't fit the mold. He fought producers who wanted to soften his voice, rewrite his songs, and strip away the edge that made him unique. His resistance wasn't theatrical. It was a survival response. To Waylon, losing control meant losing identity. And when he pushed back, Nashville pushed harder, nearly grinding his career into the ground. By the 1970s, Jennings was waging a quiet war on a different front: cocaine addiction. What began as a tool to survive grueling schedules spiraled into a dependency so severe it nearly destroyed him financially and physically. At his peak, Jennings was burning through $1,500 of cocaine a day, sleeping only in short bursts, and operating with a paranoia that made even close friends worry he wouldn't last much longer. Yet, despite the chaos, he continued performing with an iron presence, never canceling shows, never letting the audience see the cracks. What makes Waylon Jennings one of country music's toughest figures is not the addiction, the survivor's guilt, or the battles with Nashville. It's that he fought them all and rebuilt himself without asking for sympathy. When he finally overcame cocaine in the mid-1980s, he did it quietly, without public spectacle. His toughness was not loud. It was grounded in endurance, honesty, and an unshakable refusal to let anything, fate, industry, or personal demons break him. Willie Nelson, the survivor. Built from fire, debt, and restless roads. Willie Nelson's toughness was never about loud rebellion. It was a quiet, unbreakable endurance shaped by poverty, heartbreak, betrayal, and a lifetime of setbacks that would have ended most artists long before they ever reached the spotlight. Born during the Great Depression in the rural heart of Texas, Nelson grew up in a world where work came before childhood. He picked cotton under a merciless sun, chopped wood in winters that felt endless, and watched adults break under the weight of bills they couldn't pay. Those early years imprinted on him a resilience that would carry him through every disaster still waiting ahead. Before he ever stepped into Nashville, Nelson had already lived multiple lives. He worked as a cotton picker, a saddle maker, a disc jockey, a door-to-door salesman, and a struggling songwriter, sleeping in cheap motels with barely enough money for gas. Every rejection hardened him. Every failed record deal reshaped his determination. When Nashville producers dismissed his voice as too strange and his phrasing as wrong for the radio, Nelson refused to bend. He wrote songs like Crazy and Nightlife, not as polished country hits, but as expressions of sleepless nights and impossible dreams. Yet it wasn't the music industry that nearly destroyed him. It was the government. In 1990, the IRS slammed Nelson with a staggering $16.7 million tax debt, seizing nearly everything he owned: houses, ranches, recording masters, even memorabilia. Most stars would have vanished under the humiliation and financial ruin. Nelson didn't. Instead, he turned the disaster into a mission. He recorded the IRS tapes, went back on the road, played hundreds of shows, and worked relentlessly until every dollar was repaid. It wasn't glamour. It was pure survival instinct. Behind the calm smile and braided hair was a man who endured personal storms just as punishing. Nelson survived multiple marriages, addictive cycles of touring, betrayal from business partners, and the devastating suicide of his son Billy, a tragedy that would have broken a weaker spirit. Through it all, he kept performing, kept writing, and kept showing up for the people who needed him. What makes Willie Nelson one of the toughest legends in country music is not the hardships themselves, but how he endured them, with steadiness, honesty, and a refusal to let defeat define him. He didn't fight with fists or fire. He fought by outlasting everything that tried to bring him down. In a world that changed constantly, Nelson's toughness came from one truth: he never stopped moving forward. 4. Merle Haggard, the prison-born poet, who fought his way into legend. Merle Haggard's story is one of the most brutally honest journeys in country music. A life shaped by poverty, crime, confinement, and the constant fight to outrun a past determined to swallow him whole. Born in a converted boxcar during the final years of the Depression, Haggard entered the world already surrounded by hardship. His father died when he was 9, a loss that shattered the fragile stability of the family and pushed young Merle toward anger, restlessness, and a fierce distrust of authority. By his early teens, he wasn't just rebelling, he was surviving. Haggard became a runaway, hopping freight trains, stealing food, and drifting across the West in search of something he couldn't name. The streets hardened him fast. Petty crimes turned into bigger ones. And by 1957, a botched robbery landed him in San Quentin State Prison, one of the toughest prisons in America at the time. Inside those concrete walls, Haggard encountered violence, gangs, drug smuggling, and the daily reality that one wrong move could end everything. But it was also behind those walls that he found clarity. He witnessed Johnny Cash perform for the inmates, an event that struck him with a force he later described as life-changing. Haggard vowed that if he ever got out, he would not waste the second chance. He kept that promise. After his release, he worked relentlessly, performing in bars, writing songs drawn from scars he could never completely hide. But even as his career grew, Haggard faced another battle: the industry's hesitation to embrace a man with a criminal past. He fought for respect one record at a time, shaping a sound that was sharp, raw, and unapologetically real. Songs like Mama Tried, Sing Me Back Home, and Branded Man didn't just tell stories. They exposed wounds most artists would bury. Success did not erase the struggles. Haggard fought alcohol and substance temptations for decades, battled depression, and confronted the pressures of fame with the same gritty resilience he had learned behind bars. His marriages failed, his finances collapsed more than once, and the weight of his past followed him into every chapter of his life. Yet he never ran from it. He used it. His toughness wasn't performative. It was born from regret, redemption, and the discipline he learned when survival depended on making the right choice every single day. Merle Haggard remains one of the toughest figures in country music because he is proof that a man can come from the darkest corners of the American prison system and rise not by forgetting his past, but by transforming it into truth. Hank Williams Jr., the man who fell 500 feet and refused to die. Hank Williams Jr. was born into a legacy that could have crushed anyone. The son of one of the greatest country singers of all time, he grew up in the shadow of a father he barely knew, while the world demanded that he become a replica of a legend. From childhood, promoters dressed him like Hank Sr., taught him to mimic the voice, and pushed him on stage before he understood the weight of the expectations. The pressure wasn't inspiration, it was suffocation. By his early 20s, Hank Jr. was a man fighting to escape a ghost. But nothing in his life would test him more brutally than what happened on August 8, 1975. While hiking on Ajax Peak in Montana, Williams misstepped on a snowy ridge and plummeted approximately 500 feet down the mountain. The fall shattered his face, split his skull, and nearly ended his life before rescuers could even reach him. Doctors told him the injuries were some of the worst they had seen in a non-fatal fall. He underwent multiple reconstructive surgeries that rebuilt his face with plates, wires, and skin grafts. He spent months unable to speak, move, or even recognize the man staring back in the mirror. But what makes Hank Williams Jr. truly tough is not just surviving the fall. It's what he did after. Instead of returning as the manufactured image Nashville had forced upon him, he emerged with a new sound, a new identity, and a new defiance that defined his career. He grew a beard, wore sunglasses and a hat to hide the scars, and embraced a gritty Southern rock style no one expected from the son of Hank Sr. He wasn't imitating anymore. He was blazing his own trail. Yet his battles did not end there. Hank Jr. struggled with addiction, depression, and a lifetime of scrutiny from critics who insisted on comparing him to his father. He fought for his independence in an industry that preferred its stars predictable and compliant. And he fought privately with grief, especially after losing friends and collaborators who had supported him during his darkest years. What sets Hank Williams Jr. apart as one of country music's toughest legends is the combination of survival and reinvention. Most artists who suffer catastrophic injuries spend years trying to regain what they lost. Hank Jr. used the accident to become who he was always meant to be. His toughness was not built in the gym or on a stage. It was built on a mountainside, in hospital rooms, and in the quiet moments where he chose to keep going when quitting would have been easier. Tanya Tucker, the teen star who survived Nashville's cruelty. Tanya Tucker entered country music not as a young hopeful, but as a child thrown into an industry that devours even its strongest adults. At just 13, she exploded onto the charts with Delta Dawn, instantly becoming a national sensation. But with fame came a darker reality. She was no longer a kid, yet not allowed to be an adult. Nashville didn't shield her. It exposed her. The pressure to perform, to mature faster, and to stay flawless hardened her early, shaping a resilience that most people spend decades developing. Her teenage years were nothing like the fantasy the media painted. Tucker navigated a world of hotel rooms, smoky venues, predatory executives, and decisions no young person should ever be asked to make. While other girls her age were in school, Tucker was battling grown-up critics who mocked her youth and underestimated her talent. Instead of breaking, she fought back with a voice that carried grit far beyond her years and a personality fierce enough to silence anyone who doubted her. But toughness would become even more necessary when her adult life began unraveling in public. Tucker spiraled into alcohol, cocaine, and a series of turbulent relationships that kept her constantly under tabloid attack. She wasn't simply dealing with addiction. She was battling the pressure of a spotlight that never dimmed. Her romance with Glenn Campbell, passionate, volatile, and impossibly public, turned her into a punching bag for the press. Every argument, every relapse, every mistake became late-night entertainment for people who had never lived a day in her skin. And yet, through all the chaos, she never disappeared. Even when her career collapsed in the 1980s, when labels dropped her and critics wrote her off as finished, Tucker clawed her way back. She rebuilt her voice, stabilized her life, and confronted her addictions head-on. Her comeback in the 1990s wasn't a nostalgic return. It was a reclamation. Albums like What Do I Do With Me and While I'm Livin' proved she wasn't a relic of teen stardom, but a survivor who could outsing, outwork, and outlast an entire generation of performers. What makes Tanya Tucker one of the toughest legends in country music isn't just that she endured addiction, heartbreak, burnout, and public ridicule. It's that she did it from childhood and still refused to let the industry define her limits. She fought for control of her voice, her career, and her identity, and she won. Her life is proof that toughness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply the refusal to disappear. George Jones, the man who outran death more than once. George Jones didn't earn the title, the greatest voice in country music, by living a clean or easy life. His legend was forged in chaos, addiction, violence, and the kind of personal destruction that would have ended anyone without his stubborn will to survive. Born into poverty in East Texas, Jones grew up watching his father drink himself into rage, a childhood marked by fear, shouting, and a house where survival meant staying invisible. Music wasn't simply a passion, it was his escape route. But as his career soared in the 1950s and 60s, Jones found himself repeating the same patterns he had witnessed as a child. Alcohol took hold of him, then possessed him completely. What began as a way to calm nerves and silence trauma spiraled into a dependency so severe that Jones often vanished for days at a time, leaving bandmates, promoters, and even his own family searching for him. His notorious no-show reputation wasn't arrogance. It was a man drowning in addiction, unable to control the forces ripping him apart. Jones's toughness, however, revealed itself in the way he survived disasters that would have killed most artists long before their prime. He drove a riding lawnmower 8 miles to the liquor store after his wife hid his car keys, an incident remembered for its absurdity, but rooted in the dangerous depths of his addiction. He spent nights in jail, woke up in hospital beds strapped to machines, and fought through withdrawals so brutal that doctors warned he was one binge away from death. Yet his darkest years were entwined with his most beautiful music. Songs like A Good Year for the Roses and He Stopped Loving Her Today weren't performances. They were confessions of a man who lived too close to the edge. The emotional power in Jones's voice was not technique. It was survival, pain transformed into art. Jones attempted rehab multiple times, often failing, sometimes disappearing entirely. But in the 1980s, with the help of his wife Nancy, he began the climb back. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dramatic. It was a battle fought quietly, day by day, against addictions that had ruled his life for decades. His comeback wasn't celebrated for longevity, but for its impossibility. No one expected him to last. No one expected him to still be standing. What makes George Jones one of country music's toughest legends is not that he overcame addiction. It's that he survived long enough to fight it. He lived through violence, alcoholism, medical collapse, financial ruin, and emotional devastation, yet still left behind a voice unmatched in the genre's history. His toughness was not heroic. It was raw endurance, the kind that only comes from a man who refuses to die before his story is finished. Loretta Lynn, the coal miner's daughter, who fought a world built to silence her. Loretta Lynn was not just a pioneering woman in country music. She was a fighter shaped by one of the harshest upbringings in American history. Born into a coal mining family in Butcher Holler, Kentucky, Lynn came from a world where poverty wasn't a phase but a permanent condition. Her childhood was defined by cold winters without heat, nights lit by kerosene lamps, and the ever-present fear that a mine accident could take her father away at any moment. She learned early that life didn't hand out mercy, and toughness became her only inheritance. Married at just 15 to Oliver Doolittle Lynn, she entered adulthood with dizzying speed. She became a wife, a mother, and a survivor long before she ever became a singer. Her marriage was intensely complicated, marked by love, infidelity, arguments that turned violent, and a husband who alternated between pushing her dreams forward and tearing her down. Yet instead of breaking, Lynn absorbed every blow life dealt her and channeled it into her music. Her songs weren't fantasies. They were battle reports written from a kitchen table after the kids had finally fallen asleep. When she arrived in Nashville, the industry tried to silence her. Labels told her to stop writing about women's real struggles: birth control, marital fights, independence, abuse. But Lynn refused to soften her truth. Her toughness was intellectual as much as emotional. She pushed for control of her material, demanded respect from producers, and insisted her lyrics remain unedited. At a time when women in country music were expected to behave, Lynn sang about surviving male violence, calling out unfaithful husbands, and claiming power in a culture determined to take it from her. But behind the artistic defiance was a woman fighting constant personal storms. She endured miscarriages, health crises, the death of multiple siblings, financial instability, and the psychological weight of fame that arrived too fast and too hard. Her son Jack's tragic drowning in 1984 nearly destroyed her. For months she withdrew from the world, devastated beyond words. Yet she returned, not because the industry demanded it, but because she refused to let grief define her story. What makes Loretta Lynn one of the toughest figures in country music history isn't simply that she broke barriers for women. It's that she did it while carrying a lifetime of trauma, heartbreak, and exhaustion, and still managed to hold her ground in a world that fought her every step of the way. She didn't just endure the country music machine. She changed it. And she changed it by surviving everything that should have stopped her long before the spotlight ever found her. The Neen, Kris Kristofferson, the soldier, scholar, and rebel who rewrote country music by sheer will. Kris Kristofferson's toughness is unlike anyone else in country music. While many legends were forged through hardship, Kristofferson was shaped by discipline, sacrifice, and a relentless refusal to accept the life others planned for him. Born into a strict military family, he grew up under rules so rigid that weakness, in any form, was not tolerated. He excelled academically, became a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, boxed competitively, wrote poetry in secret, and carried himself with the discipline of a man preparing for a lifetime of frontline battles. Before ever stepping into Nashville, Kristofferson served as a captain and helicopter pilot in the U.S. Army. He trained with Rangers, survived brutal field conditions, and mastered the kind of mental endurance required to stay steady under impossible pressure. The military expected him to rise further, possibly to a high-ranking, decorated career. But Kristofferson stunned everyone when he abandoned the path laid out for him. He turned down a prestigious teaching post at West Point, walked away from security, and chose the one career guaranteed to break him: songwriting in Nashville. The consequences were immediate. His parents disowned him, his marriage collapsed, and Nashville did not welcome him with open arms. Kristofferson ended up sweeping floors at Columbia Studios and working as a janitor, all while living in a rundown apartment where he wrote songs that would later define a generation. But what made him truly tough was not the physical labor. It was the humiliating gap between the life he'd left behind and the life he was now fighting for. His determination became legendary in 1970 when he landed a helicopter in Johnny Cash's yard just to deliver a demo tape. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a calculated risk by a man who had already survived far harsher decisions. Cash didn't sign the song immediately, but the gesture forced Nashville to take Kristofferson seriously. His writing career soared, but his life remained a war zone. Kristofferson fought industry rejection, battled alcoholism, endured multiple divorces, and clashed with executives who tried to mold him into something safer. His film career added new pressure. and new addictions, but he carried the same discipline that carried him through military service. He never backed down. He never softened his voice or his beliefs. Even when facing the slow decline of memory later in life, he confronted it with honesty rather than fear. What makes Kris Kristofferson one of country music's toughest legends is not one defining crisis, but the combination of intellect, discipline, and fearlessness. He refused the easy path, destroyed the expectations placed on him, and rebuilt himself through sheer force of will. He is proof that toughness isn't always born in chaos. Sometimes it's forged in choice. Now remember me, David Allan Coe, the outlaw who lived the life others only sang about. David Allan Coe is one of the most controversial and genuinely tough figures to ever come through country music. Not because of image, marketing, or myth-making, but because his life before fame was harsher and more violent than anything the outlaw movement later portrayed. Raised in reform schools, correctional institutions, and on the streets, Coe grew up with no safety net and no illusion that the world would ever treat him kindly. By the time most kids were learning multiplication, Coe was learning how to survive in environments built to harden even grown men. At 9 years old, he was already cycling through juvenile detention centers. As a teenager, he lived on the streets, slept under bridges, and stole to survive. These early experiences didn't just toughen him, they shaped a worldview built on defiance and distrust. Eventually, Coe graduated from juvenile facilities to some of the toughest adult prisons in the country. Inside, he encountered violence, racial tensions, gangs, and a daily struggle to stay alive. He later claimed he survived multiple assaults by refusing to back down, a toughness he carried with him long after leaving prison walls. It was behind bars that Coe began writing songs, turning his rage, trauma, and isolation into lyrics that didn't fit Nashville's tidy expectations. When he was released, he hitchhiked to Music City with a guitar, a stack of songs, and nothing else. Nashville didn't welcome him. Executives found him too rough, too unpredictable, too unwilling to compromise. While other artists played the game, Coe slept in cars, performed on street corners, and refused to soften his edges. His outlaw reputation wasn't a marketing strategy, it was documentation. Coe lived harder than most of his peers. He survived drug abuse, violent confrontations, financial collapses, biker club entanglements, and an industry that tried repeatedly to silence him due to his controversies and unpredictable behavior. Yet despite being rejected by mainstream country, he wrote some of the genre's most powerful songs, including Would You Lay With Me, In a Field of Stone, and Take This Job and Shove It, which became massive hits for other artists. Coe's toughness wasn't heroic or glamorous, it was raw survivalism. He endured abuse, institutional brutality, public backlash, and decades of industry exile, but he never apologized for who he was. He never softened his sound, never diluted his persona, and never tried to fit into Nashville's system. Love him or hate him, David Allan Coe embodies the kind of unpolished, unbreakable grit that forged the entire outlaw movement. What makes him one of the toughest legends in country music history is simple. Others sang about being outlaws. Coe lived it.